Thanks for joining us today. We're about to present a talk called One Drupal Platform, Multiple Government Products. And in this talk, we'll share about how our current project, the VA.gov CMS, supports a product-oriented approach to making content more veteran-centered. So we'll talk more about what that means. But firstly, I'm Rachel Koff. I'm a UX content strategist with Civic Actions, and I've been working on the VA.gov CMS project for a few years now. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kevin Walsh, product manager. You can find Kev on the Drupal.org and also Civic Actions. And we work on a team that is composed of 3 different digital service agencies and to compose the VA.gov site-wide CMS team. So that's Civic Actions, Agile 6, and Friends from the City. And in short, what we do is we are working on a team that supports the VA.gov modernization effort. And that's a very large effort that began a couple years ago to modernize VA.gov and consolidate VA's websites into a single platform to make things more centered and easy to access services. And we support that effort with a decoupled Drupal CMS. We support 10 different distinct products. So VA's services are broken up into products. We support 10 of them on VA.gov with the CMS. And we do that with content operations, design, development, and then we also have a whole customer service stream with a help desk specifically for supporting the CMS. We have a whole training program, and we have a knowledge base. Let's talk a little bit more about how those teams interact shortly. But we wanted to present here today because the VA project is a little less common in the Drupal world, in that it supports multiple products under a single platform. And we're here to show you how this can be beneficial for large government agencies and some approaches to doing so, some things that have worked for us or ways we've gone about doing that. And I'm going to pass it over to Kev to tell you a little more about why you might want to make your project more product.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Welcome. First, just a little bit of background about Veterans Affairs, if you're not already familiar with it. First of all, it provides benefits. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel. I think you're on an older version. Shoot. Anyways, this is fine. This will work. VA provides benefits for 20 million veterans. It is the largest healthcare system in the U.S. with over 160 hospitals and 1,000 other healthcare facilities. And just a little bit about the organization itself, where it's the second largest agency after Department of Defense in terms of number of employees. And those are organized across 3 different administrations, each of which are larger than most, I think, federal agencies. It has 500 different websites, over 500 websites, and which manage, I think, close to 600,000 URLs. Luckily, that number is on its way down. And most of those websites are siloed and specific to a functional part of the agency's bureaucracy. So content is not shared across those silos, which, as you can imagine, creates a lot of duplication and therefore inconsistency and a poor experience for veterans who are trying to find information about Veterans Affairs. So with the VA.gov modernization, we're bringing those hundreds of silos under one Drupal umbrella, and rendering obsolete hundreds of those individual websites, and hopefully reducing the number of overall URLs to a small fraction of that 600,000. Don't know yet where we're going to get to, but hopefully it's going to be around 10% of that. So less than 100,000 anyways. So a little bit more about services. VA provides hundreds of different types of services to veterans, their family members, as well as a few services to active military. Broadly, these services can be organized into the groupings that you see here, which is actually a screenshot from the VA.gov homepage. The products that we're going to talk about today all map one way or other to the services that you see here, the types of services that you see here. Back a little bit to the organization's bureaucracy, though, you can see how these groupings of services are owned by different administrations at VA, VHA, VBA, and NCA. VHA is actually the largest of these because the healthcare system is so gigantic, but VBA manages all of these other benefit streams. It's worth noting that most VA services are delivered in person at a VA facility. It's a very bricks and mortar organization with over 2,500 facilities across the country. And you'll see that a lot of the products that we're supporting from Drupal are tied to this very facility-based mode of service delivery. Without a product orientation, the risk and the reality really is that VA creates a web presence and digital tools that just essentially mimic the bureaucracy, the structure of the agency, its bricks and mortar nature, and rather than the needs of the editors and ultimately the veterans that they serve. Because from the veterans' perspective, they don't really care which part of the VA bureaucracy provides them with the services that they need. They just want to be able to access and use those services, which is why it's really important, we feel, to organize the CMS according to the products that the organization provides and not around the agency's org structure. And that may sound almost cliche at this point. It's kind of the rallying cry of most information architects out there, but it's really at the core of an outcome-oriented and product-based approach to a government agency's web presence. And I think a lot of organizations who come to Drupal or other enterprise-friendly CMSs do so because these products can scale for a variety of different purposes and needs. But a lot of times we don't acknowledge the different purposes as consciously as I think we can. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to do that, a little bit how to acknowledge the overall purpose and mission of the products we're supporting and how to bake that into the actual application. So first up, first you got to know what your products are. What are the products that you support? And just backing up a little bit, some background about the ecosystem in which we're working. It is a very product-oriented one, and it was so before Drupal showed up on the scene. The ecosystem is organized by the VA Office of the CTO and specifically the digital experience, also known as Octode. There's a really simplified diagram of that ecosystem in which I think there's actually dozens of product teams simultaneously working, researching, designing, and developing veteran-centered products on this one common platform. Octode itself has its roots in the US Digital Services, which was known for a while as the VA Digital Services, because they were kind of, USDS was embedded at VA. And so each of these product teams are set up so that they can operate according to the USDS Digital Services playbook, which probably most people in this room are familiar with. But in case you're not, actually, I also just wanted to highlight the first four here, which when applied to VA is really about putting veterans at the front and center of the product process. Understanding what veterans need, addressing their entire experience from start to finish, making it simple and intuitive for them, and then building the service for veterans using agile and iterative practices, shipping the most important thing as quickly as possible for them, the ones that's going to provide the most value, and then iterating from there. So by organizing into individual product teams, each team has the time and space to do proper research with veterans on their needs and really focus on the mission and the outcome of their product, rather than, say, a predefined set of requirements set up by a business line at VA. And at the moment, the VA.gov CMS supports 10 of these products. Depending on how you count them, there's between 50 and 100 products that are managed on this platform, and the CMS is just supporting a portion of those, as you can imagine, the more content-centric ones. Now, there's a lot of diversity across the products, and I want to provide a bit of an example, even just within our 10 products that we support. And I think that understanding the diversity of the types of products is a really important part of creating a portfolio, and it's one of the purposes of having a product portfolio that's documented. So first up are the benefit hubs. This was the first product to launch from the CMS. It was really the first product that was part of the VA.gov modernization effort. If some of you are familiar with the history, this was when vets.gov was relaunched in 2015. The benefits hubs was the content on vets.gov. It was kind of the MVP experience for veterans. When that MVP was folded back into VA.gov in 2019, the CMS, it was the first product that the CMS took on to manage And this is really like the flagship content. It's the benefit hubs describe to veterans, their family members, caregivers, what services are available at VA, as well as the eligibility criteria for those services and how to apply and manage those services. It's really a starting place for veterans. And it can be very political content. I mean, it's full of policy details that matter to a lot of very opinionated stakeholders across VA, but also in Congress and outside of VA. A lot of work is done on this content product by a small team of content designers to ensure that what matters to veterans about these policies is available to them in plain language, usable form for accessing their services. So I just want to underline again, the editor base there is this fairly an expert. They are very much experts in digital services. It's within this product that the voice and tone and content style guide for VA.gov was developed. But this product is kind of at one end of the spectrum of the products that we manage. Closer to the other end of the spectrum, and I'll explain that spectrum in a minute, is the VA Medical Center product. And this was the next product to launch. Back in 2019 is when we shipped the MVP, and these have been rolling out over the last year and a half, one by one, for the 140 healthcare systems across VA. So the VMC product describes the VA healthcare facilities and the services they provide. It's by far the largest of our products. Currently has about 20,000 nodes if you want to measure size by nodes, and there's about 10,000 URLs in the front end serving that content. Sounds like a lot, but that's down quite a bit. I'm not sure the original number, but it's probably closer to between 100 and 200,000. For this product, we have about 400 editors, and instead of this kind of digital service experts concentrated in one sort of space, these editors are spread out across the country, just like the facilities themselves. Not typically digital service experts or content designers trained in human-centered design. So we've put in a lot of guardrails and guidance and very structured content to ensure that editors at each medical center can create that consistent and usable experience for veterans across the facilities. So those are just two of the products, and I think maybe you got a sense of the spectrum there, number of editors, scope, size, amount of content, and so on. And we're not going to go through all of the products in the portfolio here, but just a quick overview of the rest. But one thing I do want to mention about them is that we do work on essentially one product at a time, sometimes two, and we're, in terms of iterating, we iterate on multiple ones at once. But when we're heavy into the design and research and design process, it's one product at a time to have that kind of focus that they each deserve. And by giving that each product that kind of focus, we've been able to recognize what we think are really important differences across that portfolio and organize our teams around those differences to have the best possible outcomes. So I've highlighted here just some of the things that make each product distinct. In the left, the strategic goals and outcomes that we're going for, that's kind of like the purpose of the product, who's involved from the decision makers, the stakeholders, the editors, the policies that kind of tie all that together, the governance side of it. And then finally, the actual application itself. And Rachel's going to get into a number of specific differences there in a little bit. So we actually track all these distinct attributes in a giant spreadsheet, and we can pull out specific reports about that portfolio, like governance patterns or number of editors or for various purposes. This is useful information to have available to us. So that's the portfolio that we've created, and it's got a lot of kind of special snowflakes in it, which we love, each of them in their own way. But it kind of begs the question: how does that all hold together? How do you manage this diversity in a sustainable and scalable way in one Drupal platform? And how do you make it easier for new product teams to get started? We've got 2 or 3 spinning up in the next few months. Or also to give the focus to be able to iterate as we learn more on those existing products. It's a complicated answer to that, and this diagram is a bit messy, but I'm hoping it'll capture some of the ways that we've solved this. So this is how we've designed our team structure and our work streams. There's 5 of them. The work streams are these light red boxes that you see here, and the red circles indicate some of the things that each work stream is responsible for. So first up at the top are the products, which we've been talking about. That's the portfolio there. To the right of that is the customer service work stream. That's where we provide the training, knowledge-based articles, and help desk for the CMS users and editors. Those two tend to work very closely together for things like user onboarding when we're launching new products, the product rollouts themselves. There's a lot that goes into every medical center that goes out is essentially a and then also we get a lot of feedback from our editors and obviously the requests that come in for help. So so that's that work stream over there. Then moving down a layer, we have the CMS experience and content ops teams. I think of these kind of like siblings. I said teams. They're work streams. There's a lot of fluidity between these, but I think it is important to distinguish between their purpose. And these work streams are responsible for items that are CMS wide, so common to all products. So the CMS experience work stream is responsible for the parts of the editor experience that are common across all the products, as well as the overall brand and like the design patterns that we use, including a CMS specific design system that we will be working on in the next little while. To its right, that content ops work stream is responsible for the parts of the content model that are common to all the products, things like content types, paragraph types, and any of the shared content libraries, blocks, media, taxonomy, that kind of stuff, the lower level content model. It also maintains the governance structures that individual product teams leverage for their specific governance needs. Some other things that it does, it builds tools for accessibility to provide feedback for editors to ensure that their content is accessible. And a few other things fall in there as well. But those are some of the highlights for what Content Ops does. And then last but not least, the platform CMS team is really what makes things work smoothly. In this setup, their primary responsibility is scalability and infrastructure. We've got daily deploys, so that gets product changes out faster. And the content API is obviously critical in a decoupled CMS, and it's undergoing some major shifts right now, but they ensure that the content API is functional. It's a GraphQL on the front end to pull content out of Drupal, and well, that may be changing. So one way to think about this is the Drupal idea of contrib and core. It's not a perfect metaphor, but you can think of the core side as the stuff that's kind of more slower moving, and contrib is a place where some experimentation can happen. So in this ecosystem, I think innovation can happen anywhere here, as long as there's lots of feedback loops to bring those innovations between work streams. But I think in particular, these individual product teams are often where this innovation is happening and coming up with new design patterns or needs that then can go back lower into the application and then be brought to other products. And Rachel's got a few examples of that coming up. And then finally, I think I mentioned for this to work best, there needs to be some fluidity here. So our team is growing really rapidly right now from about 10 to 30 people, and we're finding ways that people can, they really need experience in a number of these work streams to see how it all works together. So, but ultimately we need to provide that kind of focus that each of these work streams deserves in order to have success. Okay, I'll turn it back to Rachel to talk about some of the really specific ways that this plays out.
Yeah, so what happens when you're trying to solve problems and you run into tension between the core side of things on the CMS, so the things that have application-wide consequences, and that contrib side that Kev mentioned. So those are needs that are coming from one specific product. How do you make decisions that support the integrity of your CMS product as a whole, as well as those other demands? And then where are our users in all of this? And so these tensions come up frequently in problems we're trying to solve. And to help us grapple with that, we created design principles that would help our team align around the highest goals of those two different spaces. And then we integrated them into our daily work. They remind us of what's important, and they give us a common language to use when we're debating different approaches. So our principles come out of our team's main for the CMS, and that's to provide editor-centered management of veteran-centered content. So to create a tool that is editor-centered with an editorial experience that helps content managers do their jobs and ultimately deliver content to VA.gov that is veteran-centered. So more than a simple cause and effect here, these two concepts usually show up intertwined in the problems we're trying to solve. I'll show you a few examples of how those editor-centered and veteran-centered concerns break out into design principles. So in creating our editor-centered principles, we consider what was most important to our users. And because those people are, they must use our software, it's their job. Generally, a good experience is one that makes that job easy and helps them orient to their product's larger goals. So we believe that a good CMS editorial experience helps maintain the integrity of digital experiences veterans have on VA.gov. And it can do that by preventing errors, helping editors align with VA's content strategy, and make it easy for people to keep VA.gov content up to date. And we'll share a few examples in the next section of what these principles look like in action, but in short, we believe we're orienting around an editorial experience that's purpose-driven. So we help remind people of their higher goals. It's efficient, easy to get the job done. It's approachable. So it's offering friendly guidance, consistent, and it's empowering. It helps people make decisions they need in order to do their work. On the veteran-facing side of things, so in other words, what our decisions as CMS team mean for end users visiting VA.gov, we had identified 4 main ways the CMS supports VA's mission. So while there are product teams that are not part of our team, totally separate teams at VA, that they're doing the actual setting content strategy, they're designing that front-end experience. Ultimately, our team, the CMS team, is a mechanism that provides the structures that make sure that the right content is getting to the right people in the right place, kind of the golden principle of content strategy. So as a result of our efforts to provide a single source of truth, so these are our principles here, a single source of truth so that veterans get consistent content, guardrails for accessibility, and then making wise choices about content model and content governance. Ultimately, that results in a consistent, reliable experience for veterans. And to hold ourselves accountable to these principles, we created an issue template. So Epic in our backlog is tagged with one of these design principles. It does not solve all of our problems for us, but going through the exercise of checking off that apply does remind us of kind of our higher purpose and things that we've agreed are important for the CMS to do. So we've established that an editor-centered experience is one that's purpose-driven, approachable, all those things. But living up to those ideals also means balancing the need to structure consistent patterns across a very large system. And that can also create flexibility that carries context and meaning within a particular work stream. So to consider the editorial experience across the entire application, we've done some things to create further consistency, and I'll show you some examples of that. And then we'll look at some really tailored experiences for particular products. So here's an example that seems really basic. We're looking at a particular field that shows up on all of our forms. It's for the section settings, and we've made it so that it shows up in exactly the same way on all of those forms. So very basic, but easier said than done, especially in an ecosystem with a lot of products and content types. And the more consistency, we know the more consistency we can create in that editorial experience, the more our users can just fall back on pattern recognition to navigate the interface and understand what's going on. And we've done that in a lot of small ways. This is just one example. So this is the menu you would use as an editor to basically select who owns the content. And the way you do that is the same on every form, even though you might make a different choice on different forms. And this way people know what to expect and they don't have to think too much about it. So setting it up this way did involve some label changes. And once we made those decisions, I went in and documented some of those labels decisions in we maintain a backend style guide for interface copy. And that means later when we go back and we do something else in our interface and we use the word sections and we kind of contextualize that for people, we're using sections in the same way. We're defining it in the same way to our users. And that creates more of a consistent experience across the interface. So the next important thing to do for application-wide patterns is to create some really straightforward paths to getting it done, and those patterns can be applied to multiple products. In this example, I'll show you of kind of what we've done for hospital editor also applies to other products. And we did this because for many editors, it can be disorienting or a little scary that they can log in and poke around and see all the content on all of VA.gov. So they can't edit it all, but they can see it all. And this is especially true for hospital editors further afield. They have less context and understanding of how things are set up. And so we wanted to help them quickly get to where they needed to go and avoid any anxiety about, like, what if I accidentally break something? So when an editor is assigned to just one section, or that's just one bucket of content, here the example is I'm just assigned to VA Montana Healthcare, I'm taken directly to my content after logging in. That way I don't have to navigate an enormous hierarchical menu or use a lot of filters to drill down to where I want to go. And that applies to anybody assigned to just one section, not just folks in the hospital sections. So with multiple products and a decoupled environment that basically by nature abstracts content and how it's going to be presented, it can also be hard for editors to understand the what and why of what they're seeing when they're in Drupal. And it's really important for those editors to be able to use the interface and complete their tasks on a basic level, basic usability, but they really need to feel like they understand what they're doing and what impact it has in the world. So this is an example of a design pattern we developed initially to meet the needs of one product, and then we kind of contributed it back to patterns we apply across the application, and it's now implemented on multiple product types. So here in this example, an editor is working on a piece of content that uses data from another source. And right here you can see the piece of data is the page title, Federal Way Vet Center, and they're not able to edit it. So instead of just disabling this field, we implemented a pattern that clearly designates the content as separate from the rest of the form, its own special box. It doesn't look like something that, and we included a tooltip that kind of explains the situation. So if you're wondering, why can't I edit information? It's a very, and it's a good reason. Sometimes they base lives right inside the CMS, and editors can access it without logging in. And we developed the content design of the knowledge base to consider a wide variety of needs across products. So here you can see some examples of content components that are part of the article template. And the one I want to call out here is this part that we include on our articles. It's a section that says what it means to veterans. And it's just about reminding editors of the highest purpose of their work, which is serving veterans. And what that looks like for it varies a lot. This is a very simple example, but sometimes it's way less obvious what a task in the CMS might ultimately mean to veterans. But we think that it's important to always kind of create a clear understanding of the ultimate impact of an editor's work.
Sorry, Rachel, sorry to interrupt. Your video and audio got, oh, it's back. Your video and audio got a bit choppy, and then your video just totally disappeared, but we could hear you. But now you've got the slide decks back.
Apologies, I am going to video mute and see if that helps. Are you still seeing my slides?
Yeah, we got slide 5 there. Yep.
Okay, great. I'll continue. Please interrupt me again if there are tech issues. So next I'm going to share how we've aside from kind of the application-wide patterns that we've established, some ways that we've accommodated really product-specific design patterns to meet really specific editorial needs. And that's in order to create a more meaningful connection between kind of what the CMS, how the CMS is set up, and the real-world context for editors' work. So here's an example of a specific editorial experience we created for folks who are editing landing pages for VA marketing campaigns. A totally separate team at VA worked on the front-end designs and templates for these pages, and they include a series of structured content components such as hero banners, text sections, featured content, embedded videos. And some of the components, such as the hero, are required in all campaign landing pages, but others are optional. And in much of our system, we've designed rigid structured content types where editors are mostly going in and they're filling in boxes more than they are building pages. This content type is mostly that, but editors do have some choices to make, and they're coming into it in a page building mindset as they decide what types of content components they want to use to tell their story. So to help those people feel confident about the choices they're making as they start adding content to their page, we created graphics in each field set that provides a basic sense of layout. On the left side here, you can see an abstracted representation of the basic layout of the hero banner, and then on the right, you can see the hero banner itself as it appears on the front end. And ultimately, editors do have the option to preview their work, but only later on after they've saved their work. So we felt that it was really important to help people know what's going to happen so they can make good editorial decisions. And of the set of content components available to editors creating their marketing page, as I mentioned, some are required, others are optional, but they always appear in a set order. And within the optional components are fields that editors must complete in order to use them. They're required fields. So that makes things a little tricky. And to solve this problem of multiple layers of requirement, we added a checkbox field that allows editors to turn on an optional segment, and then that enables the required fields within. So in this example here, you see that only after you enable the video segment do you get the field, you're able to see the fields you'll need to fill out in order to add a video to your page. And that's when those required fields kick in. So here's a totally different example, but an interesting one about product-specific prompted us to make some tailored changes. This is for a VA medical center system sites that all of those sites have a page for policies. And as you can see noted in the example on the slide, some of these policies are specific to the local medical center system, that's in the yellow box, and mostly it's visitation policies. And other policies apply to all VA medical centers nationwide, that's in the green box. So we needed to accommodate both types of policy and honor VA's intent to have a single source of truth for all of its content. So we set about creating a governance, content model, and editorial experience that could support that. And for local editors, they needed an experience that made it clear what they can and cannot edit on their policies page and why that's the case. So here's what the editorial experience looks like. We surfaced the national content. You can see it in line, so editors know that it's there, but they can't make changes to it. Here's a detail of what that non-editable content looks like to a hospital editor. You'll recognize this pattern from the example I shared earlier. Editors can't make the changes to the content, and the tooltip helps them understand that this is intentional and explains why it was set up this way. And ultimately, because editors can see VA's standard visitation policy in line, this has a practical function that they can make informed decisions about their locally specific policy content and make sure they're not duplicating anything. We then had to make a way for the national editors to manage that standardized content. So we built a separate content type called Centralized Content, where those editors can break out, work on chunks of that standardized content, and they're structured as separate paragraph types within a form. So you can see here, there's a label that kind of designates This is what this paragraph or chunk of, and then any changes a national editor makes here will show up on all the forms that the local editors see. So it's maintaining a single source of truth. We're not going to ultimately end up with a lot of conflicts down the road. So in this last example of a tailored editorial experience, I'll show you how we try to address CMS experience for people who are most likely to struggle in a multi-product Drupal platform. This type of editor works in a vet center, and if you're not familiar with vet centers, they function as outreach offices where veterans can get help connecting to VA services, and they can receive some services like counseling there directly. And the folks who manage content for these offices are mostly doing other things in their day-to-day, and they're not likely to have much digital content management or Drupal experience. So we wanted to remove barriers to completing their content tasks and reduce the amount of Drupal context they needed to do so. So instead of forcing editors to use tables, which is kind of the typical way people find content, to drill down to the content type they need to edit, they might be asking, what the fiddle is content type. As you can see in this example, we assumed that our editors didn't and shouldn't need to understand content types to do their job. So instead, we implemented a more dashboard-like experience. So this is particular to the vet center's product. And each card you see here provides context for an action link that jumps the editor right into the part of the form they need to work with. So we're getting people there quickly. As you'll remember earlier, editors like this are automatically taken to their content after logging in. This is the first thing they see. And then they can click on a card, say they need to change they have a new program they want to feature in their featured content. They click on that, they can go right to the part of the form they need to work with. We also surfaced other less frequently needed tasks further down the page below the card. And by designing this customized experience for this group of editors, this is important not only for vet center editors, but for our kind of position in VA in general. So we increase the likelihood that folks like this could successfully maintain their content, and that is part of smoothing the road to more widespread adoption of our multi-product Drupal platform across VA's organization. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Kev to talk about our last point about the product layer.
So I'll make this really quick, but this is just one of the tools that we've used to sort of help with some of the things that Rachel's just talked about. So it really comes to, it's a fairly basic idea. We now have a vocabulary in Drupal. The next slide, Rachel. I don't know if you've switched it. There it is. Okay. So we now have a very basic. It's a vocabulary in Drupal with all the products we manage. And so what this allows is now we can tag various entities in Drupal. So whether it's content, taxonomy terms, or even configuration entities like content types or whatever with those products. So far, we've only done this twice, but I think it's been really useful already, and we're seeing lots of other opportunities for really building in that product framework into the application. So I'll just go over these two examples really quick. The first one is these product dashboards that Rachel just talked about. So the entire site is organized into sections. There's about 600 sections. Sections more or less map to products. Like every section, every product has like instances. So there's 140 VA medical centers and 140 sections, so buckets of content tied to that medical center. And we're using Workbench access, which determines who can edit content in each section. So by tagging each section with a product, we're then able to say, okay, well, this bucket of content is tied to this product. And that allows us to place an editorial experience, these dashboards, accordingly. So there are 300 vet centers. That means that there are taxonomy terms for the sections taxonomy. Each of those are tagged with the product, and that's what triggers the display of this product-driven dashboard. That's one place, and then the other place that we're using it so far is in the knowledge base. The image here is actually a prototype. It's not not the way it looks quite yet, but we have a way of now tagging all the knowledge base articles by what product that knowledge base article relates to. And the reason for that, again, is like most editors only work with one product. So if we have 200 knowledge base articles, there maybe only be 60 that matter to them, or more or less. And so by tagging each knowledge base with an article, we can start to build landing pages for in the knowledge base for each product, and then build relationships and lists of knowledge base articles that are specific to each product. So there's two ways we're using that product taxonomy, that vocabulary in the application, but we're looking at some other opportunities for governance or for CMS experience purposes in the future. So just to sum up a little bit, here we talked about 6 ways of making your Drupal project more product oriented. First of all, define that portfolio with all its diversity, create a team structure to support that product focus, have design principles to unite the approach to different products, and an editorial experience that is CMS that again unites that experience, but also address product-specific editorial needs and the needs of editors for each product. And then finally, that last thing about building that product layer into the application. We did so with the taxonomy, but it could be done in other ways as well. And that's it. So we've got only about 4 minutes left. Went a bit longer, but happy to answer some questions. And of course, we've got emails there, so happy to follow up separately. Yeah, just open the floor if there's any questions or comments. Or not. I see Howard asking, how long is this effort? We started the CMS, the Drupal's been around at VA, at least as part of the VA.gov modernization since 2018. We launched our first product, those benefit hubs, in really early 2019, and the first medical center later on that year. And I don't know when it'll end, but there'll be new products coming out in the next few years that are going to be built within this ecosystem that CMS will support. See Stephen's questions about features more advanced than what leadership could scope. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's some of the, again, just driving things by what the products need. And then we didn't really talk about this, but as we're working on individual products, we're often kind of like bookmarking, oh, maybe this is an important thing for other products in the future. So we've made some decisions as we went along to not over determine things for a specific product, and to try to find ways, again, of pulling things from that sort of contrib area, if you will, into the sort of system layer. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think workbench access, which is the way we do permissions, editing permissions on the site, is a good example of that. Like when we only had one product, you didn't really need all of that, but we knew that we were going to need something. So we went with something relatively simple, and it's been scaling well. So, and we found it as a decent framework to build a product-centric editorial experience around. I don't know, Rachel, if you want to speak to some of the other features that you talked about there, and that.
Yeah, I think I don't quite know how to parse out, like whether the support we have had is pretty unique to our kind of VA ecosystem and who our product owners are. But I will say a lot of these things have been slow, on a slow simmer for a long time. So that the dashboards that we presented were kind of, it was kind of years in the making of getting those into the system. So it has been a slower process, and I think in ways that does make sure we're moving wisely along with the content model, along with what we learn about our users, especially as more and more people are coming on.
Well, there's only about 10 seconds. So again, thanks so much for attending. Really happy y'all can make it. And yeah, enjoy the rest of Drupal GovCon. And get in touch if you have any questions about anything. Love to chat more.
Thanks, Dylan.